So my name is Megan Hope, and I'm going to just briefly introduce Julie. And I also want to thank all of you for attending the May FDI presentation. And this is featuring our very own ACU Online Writing Center Director, Julie Johnson Archer. Now, when the FDI committee first started planning our offerings for this year, there was an overwhelming consensus that we need Julie to share her research and her expertise in racial and linguistic identity in academic writing. I can honestly say that the conversations she facilitated about a year ago on anti-racism in the writing curriculum really changed the way that I provide feedback and develop courses in the online setting. Now, just a little bit about Julie. Julie joined ACU Dallas in 2019 as the Assistant Director of the Online Writing Center and was appointed Director in 2021. She has also taught first-year composition at ACU Dallas, as well as at the Abilene campus, where she completed her MA in English. Her research interests include writing center theory, communities of practice, and linguistic justice in higher education. Julie completed a graduate certification in writing center administration from St. Cloud State University last May, which spurred the research she will present today. An interesting fact about Julie is that she is an artist. She enjoys photography, painting, ceramics, and crocheting, and most recently, she's learning calligraphy. She lives in Fort Worth, Texas, with her husband and 2 cats. Please join me in welcoming Julie Johnson Archer.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everyone. It is good to see some faces, and I know those of you who I can't see your faces, you might be eating lunch, which is great. Let me share my screen as we're getting started. So if you can just let me know if you cannot see. Okay, you can. Great. All right. Well, thanks again, Megan, and let's get started. I do see some folks in the room who were part of that conversation Megan mentioned. That was a year ago where Dr. Scott Self and I led some conversations about anti-racism as it relates to the writing curriculum. And so whether or not you're familiar with that conversation or you feel new to these ideas maybe, I want to acknowledge that these topics can be personal and even uncomfortable. So I'm planning to give multiple opportunities throughout, especially the first half of this webinar or this presentation, to give you an opportunity to reflect. So you might go ahead and just grab a pen and a notebook if you have it, or open a Google Doc, however you like to take notes, and reflect as we go. And then towards the second half, or towards the end, I'll do my best to leave us some time to have some group discussion as well. So the plan for today is I'm going to share some findings from a research study that I did last spring and some possible applications in our work as instructors. And then I hope we can also learn from each other from a group discussion towards the end. I want to begin with a quick icebreaker in the chat room. I know you're all familiar with racial identity, but I wanted to kind of gauge your familiarity with the concept of linguistic identity. So you could simply type yes, no, somewhat. Are you familiar with linguistic identity? Just to gauge where you are with this conversation. Okay, great. Awesome, thank you. Okay, well, I first became interested in this topic as an ACU undergraduate student and a tutor as well in the Writing Center in Abilene. And At that time, I had professors like Scott Self. I even got to have Stephen Johnson as professors, and they helped me think critically about systems of power, race, poverty, privilege. And so that really informed so much of my attention at that time. And so when I became the director of the Writing Center here at ACU Dallas, I recognized that I had some new to me institutional power. And I have this goal to use my privilege and use this position to listen to students' voices and help them ultimately be profoundly successful in their writing at ACU. So I know my own racial and linguistic identities have benefited my academic experience and writing success, but I wondered how our students felt about their experiences with academic writing. So I want to start us off with some definitions. So racial, or really ethnic identity, is what I'm talking about, which is identity or identification with shared social, cultural, linguistic, religious, and often racial membership. Linguistic identity is identification with the languages and dialects and different speech communities that you're part of. Writing Center scholar Nisha Ann Green talks about how language is an essential part of identity. And I've put some article titles in these slides and in the references list at the end as well, in case you're interested in reading more from some of these key scholars in the field of Writing Center and composition studies. More definitions. So contrary to widely held beliefs in higher education, standard American English, which I'll also refer to as academic English, is not a neutral thing. Like race, it's a social construction of what is considered the right way to write. And historically, it's based on middle class, white language customs. So that's important to acknowledge. Another term that I will use another term to know about is code meshing, which is Rashawn Young, or Dr. Vey, as he likes to go by. That's his term that I'm going to refer to simply as language mixing. Language mixing also isn't my term, but that just means using more than one language or dialect in one communication act. So here's our first opportunity for reflection. I want you to take a minute and think about your own racial and linguistic identities. How do you identify? And then think about your relationship with academic English. That might be something you haven't really thought about before. So you can feel free to share in the chat if you would like, but again, this is really intended to be a time for you to reflect. You could just write it down and think about it later even. As I was thinking and preparing, I was also doing this reflection activity and thought I would share just personally that I grew up with so many teachers in my family, y'all, like everyone's a teacher. I was surrounded by books and mostly white educators in my family and extended family. And then I was thinking about my linguistic identity. It's pretty close to academic English, with some Texan thrown in there. And I really didn't have that many barriers, I think, to developing a written voice that's pretty easy to be accepted in academia. So that's where I'm coming from. So I want to share with you some of my study. And so I'll begin with first why I did it, or the purpose of the research, which was to better understand ACU Online student perspectives. I was also following the Conference on College Composition and Communication, the 4Cs demand to recognize the interconnection between language, race, and identity. I based my project on two theories, translingualism and anti-racism. Translingualism is the idea that language must always be seen as a resource and never as a barrier. This idea runs counter to the idea that all academic writing needs to look and sound like standard American English to be taken seriously. Then Kendi defines anti-racism saying racial groups are equals and there's nothing right or wrong with any racial group. So I want you to think about how language is tied to racial and ethnic groups and how these differences are often viewed as wrong or unacceptable in academia. As we're getting started, can you think of an example of when your voice or your writing was judged? I think this is a helpful question. As I was thinking about it, though, I personally struggled to think of an example. And I think that reveals my privilege in this context. Again, my voice and my writing have largely been accepted and even praised in academic circles. But as we'll see from some of the participants in my research, this isn't true for everyone. It might not be true for you. This might be a good question to write down and think about later as well. So my research questions were, how do online students perceive the relationship between their race, languages, and dialects and academic writing? How do they perceive mixing languages or dialects in academic writing? And how do they describe the importance of academic writing for their career goals? So I sent out surveys to all of ACU Dallas students at the time and did some follow-up interviews with some of them. So one thing to note, just from the start, my sample is not generalizable to even all of ACU Dallas, much less online students generally. But I did have 60 participants complete the survey, and 10 of those did follow-up interviews. About 90% of these students were doctoral or graduate level students, majority female, and the average age was 43. So in the next few slides, you'll see some tables. You're welcome to look at them later. I'm going to go through them quickly. So a few other stats about the participants. The largest ethnic groups were white, then Black, then Latino, with others represented as well. Collectively, they speak 14 languages and can write in 9. They just blow me away. The main one other than English being Spanish. They listed over 20 dialects that they speak, like Southern English, Black English or AAVE, and Spanglish was another one, but this list was just really fascinating to read through. So I've broken my findings into sections. First, race, next, language, then language mixing, and last, career goals. So for the sake of time, I am moving pretty quickly through my findings, but if you're interested in reading more or seeing more of the data, I'm happy to share. There was a lot of data. So email me, reach out to me. I'm happy to share more. So when asked how participants felt their race or their ethnicity impacts their academic writing, if at all, over half said race has no impact or the impact is neutral, saying things like their family's education background was a bigger influence. Almost a quarter of participants said race has a positive impact on their academic writing because it expands their perspective or because of white privilege. Then those who said the impact of race was negative were because of difficulty with code switching, going back and forth between the different ways of writing and speaking, and a fear of being stereotyped, like the assumption may be African Americans write at a lower level, one participant said. One African American interviewee said that the impact of race was negative, saying that when they interact via email and phone calls, most believe that I am Caucasian, and that has been a source of frustration. Two interviewees said that they don't try to represent their racial identity in their writing for different reasons. One white participant said, "It's not even a thought that enters my mind," while a Black participant said, "I want to avoid racial bias by readers or professors because that's happened before." Moving on to linguistic identity, 30% felt their languages or dialects help them when they write for their courses. Only 11% said their languages hinder their academic writing. Some who said their languages and dialects help said it's because of their proximity to academic English. Others said they have a larger pool of words and ideas to pull from as they're writing. Those who said their languages hinder their academic writing mentioned difficulty with academic audience expectations. One said, "There's a reason Grammarly works. The more I sound like an old white male, the better my grade will be." So let's pause here and try to remember how it felt when you were learning to write at the graduate level. I've heard lots of stories, and I hear them a lot in the Writing Center, about what it's like to learn to write at the graduate level. And for me, I remember I enjoyed the challenge. I tried channeling my inner Dr. Steve Weathers voice, who was the most academic sounding person I'd ever heard. And by the time I started graduate school and doing graduate writing, I had studied advanced English grammar. My writing toolbox was really full of tools. And it was still hard, of course, but I was really prepared. As I'm reflecting, especially around this topic and in my work in the Writing Center, I've been thinking about the students I'm working with, who some of them have similar experiences, but some have very different experiences from mine. And what comes to mind is that there might be a difference in some goals. So for me, my goal when I was writing at the graduate level was ultimately to become an academic. That was my end goal. And so that impacted how I was learning and writing at the graduate level. Some of our students might not have the ultimate goal to become an academic, like some of us in the room. All of us were teachers. So that's an important thing to think about as well. I asked how participants would feel about mixing their languages or dialects in their academic writing if their instructor were open to it. So if they were in a setting that was accepting of that. And responses were pretty mixed, as you can see. When I asked about their actual practices, not their interest in language mixing, but what they actually do, 71% said they do not mix their languages or dialects in their academic writing for many reasons. Some of those reasons were because they value clarity, or they do value having a standardized language. For example, one said, I have to be the widest version of myself at work and in school. Another said, I work very diligently to take my voice out of academic writing. Others said the risk of ineffective communication with language mixing is too high, and too much can get lost in translation. Those who were interested in language mixing said it would be more inclusive, engaging, and authentic, saying, I would cry tears of joy. Another said, I would like to hear more of my peers' voices. Lastly, an overwhelming majority of participants said that learning academic writing is important for their career goals because it will help them with job-related advancement and getting a degree. So one thing I haven't mentioned yet from my findings is that in all the questions about race and language, participants often created a division between academic writing and personal creative writing, saying that all of these aspects of their identity really benefited their creative writing endeavors. So to wrap up my findings, it's clear to me that student perspectives are diverse. There's no one prevailing perspective, and some haven't even considered these ideas before, or they might be in the midst of self-discovery. The data suggests that ultimately these standards we have for academic English are both valued and injurious. They're valued as a tool for education and career goals. They are injurious to those, or for those who feel like they need to hide parts of themselves and write white, as Writing Center scholar Asao Inoue says. Some students feel their white privilege advantages them with academic writing as well. All right, so here's where I would love to open it up more for some group discussion. I've got 3 applications with discussion questions in the next few slides. And I must first give credit to my Writing Center team. I've shared all of this with them. We're talking about it and still wrestling with how we can apply this data in our Writing Center work, but they helped a lot with giving suggestions. So our first application is to make writing feedback specific. One participant said, professors should be mindful of the racial insensitivity that accompanies feedback focused on clarity to multilingual racially diverse students. So for example, instead of simply writing unclear or awkward in the margins, which ultimately that feedback might be unclear to the student, you can write something specific like, I got stuck on this word. Did you mean this or that instead? And I acknowledge that this is a bit of a Writing Center slant because we're giving feedback often before the final draft, where a comment like that might be helpful. So it's not an exact science, but keeping this application in mind, I think will strengthen writing feedback. So first, here's an invitation to reflect on how you give writing feedback. And if you'd like to share, you can unmute or share in the chat what is one way that you give specific feedback to your students? It's a big question to get us started. I was also thinking back to Linnea's FDI presentation where we talked a lot about feedback. So I feel like there's a good tie-in with her presentation here.
Julie, I find I'm trying more to explain why I'm giving the feedback that I'm giving. So it kind of forces me to rethink why I feel so important to mark that on their paper. So I'm explaining this because it would help you to better frame your argument in this way, or it would help to link these topics. So I'm just trying to kind of provide that extra why when I'm providing the feedback, rather than just leaving abbreviations.
That's good.
Julie, this is Sarah. I have been trying to say, I'm not sure what you mean, or I'm not following. Because sometimes I really am not able to, and maybe it's not about linguistic identity, but maybe it's I'm just struggling to figure out what is the idea that you're trying to convey to me that I can link to the rubric. And so I've been trying to do what I hope is a non-blaming approach, which is just help me. I'm not following. And oftentimes I'll leave a submission on the side that says, if you can come back and help me understand, then we can look at this again. So.
One thing I do, I give the feedback, but then I continually invite them. If you have questions, if you'd like to meet with me, trying to open the door to, this isn't the final thing. You know, I want you to participate in this, and I'm willing to negotiation if you think this hasn't been met what you're trying to do, what I'm seeing. So I feel that's important, just that safe relationship.
That can be hard when you're the one giving the grade.
And it doesn't work with everybody, to be honest. Yeah, some just don't.
And it looks like a few people in the comments have mentioned using video feedback instead, or in addition to.
You know, when we had the training with Linnea, it really helped me remember a good reminder, what's the point of the assignment? There are some of my undergrad courses that many times the point of the assignment is just to understand if they've really learned and they're understanding the material. The point of the assignment is not whether they get everything in APA right or get everything correct. And so I'm really trying to focus in my grading and with my adjuncts to say, okay, what's the point in this assignment? If this is a heavy writing class that we're trying to really get them to learn some things, let's concentrate on their writing. But if not, you know, did they get that communicate their understanding in a way that is, and I do understand that the goals for grad and undergrad are very different. You know, as Sarah and Jackie are working with students that really need to be able to write well. However, some of my undergrad students, I'm grateful if they communicate, they understand the concept. So understanding the point, I think, is part of it.
What I have used previously is statements like, this is what I think I hear you're saying. And, you know, is this what you're saying? I'm asking them to clarify, because sometimes what I found in students, especially students of color, is that the formulation of ideas and thoughts about their writing is different in their mind, and when they get ready to put it on paper. And I don't know if that's something you found, Julie, but I know in the students that I have worked with before, this has been kind of some of the issue is they're formulating what they're saying in their language, in their mind, and that's how it ends up on the paper. So if I ask them, this is what I think you're saying, or is this, what you're saying, it kind of helps them to come back and say, no, this is what I'm saying. So I think we have to kind of keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, definitely. I found some saying similar things, having difficulty translating from my brain to getting it on the page. I think to some degree, a lot of folks can relate to that, not just students of color, but that is definitely a concern or a difference, especially if you are already, the way you are used to communicating in all sorts of different circles somehow has a lot of differences from what is expected from professors or in the academic world. Yeah.
Julie, I have a question, and maybe I admit my ignorance. So my philosophy is set the bar high, and then I'm gonna create the scaffolding to get you there. So, students are always mad at me for demanding too much and requiring APA and all that. And so it's a tension for me, because you can see some educational discrimination that happens. And so sometimes it feels like I'm harder on people. Well, I'm even hesitant to say it here, but some people of color, it's obvious they have not had the opportunities that some of the white students have had, or, and of course that's generalization, but so it's a struggle with me, because I want to keep that bar high, so as you're talking to me, how do I navigate that and give opportunity for voice? So it's
Yeah, thanks for saying that. No, thank you so much for sharing. That's a tension. I'll say it keeps me up at night, because that's all. I mean, what do we do in the Writing Center? We're constantly working with students to meet them where they are, help them bridge the gap. But one thing I'll say is that I think our commitment to, especially at the graduate level, to high standards, high writing expectations, it can be an also and situation where we aren't letting go of high standards. But where can we find ways where we can meet those high standards in ways that aren't just a one right way? I think that is something I haven't seen enough examples of to even be able to say, here's what that looks like. I think we won't find out until we work on it, what that looks like. So I appreciate your comment. Well, let's move on to the next application. So number 2, academic writing expectations should be transparent and explicit. So this is a really challenging one, because so much of what is considered good writing, good academic writing, is subjective. It's not explicitly stated. So this data from my research revealed an interest from students in maintaining or even improving clear expectations of academic writing. So I've got a couple of examples. First is the language used in prompts. So instead of a vague statement that, in the rubric, the writing should be flawlessly edited, no errors, consider stating upfront that this essay should be edited in line with standard English, period. Or this essay or assignment should be edited in line with standard English and the grammar rules of any other languages or dialects used, if that's an option. So that's one example of just clarifying one often hidden expectation. Another is to give a clear instruction for who the audience is for a given assignment. So rather than just write for an academic audience, which is vague and I think has been misused in some contexts to mean a predominantly white audience. Tell them for an assignment to write for a diverse group of coworkers. That's just one example. So I want you to think about writing expectations that might need to be clarified to your students, or even for your program as a whole. Do any come to mind that you could share? Another big question. Or even things that you might want clarity about as the instructor that you don't quite have.
Julie, I can kind of give an example, and I think this is maybe where you're going. In a 200 level class in the undergrad healthcare administration program, the first assignment was an APA paper. And a lot of times students were just entering ACU when they were taking that course. And you could almost sense the stress that students were feeling when trying to write within the parameters of an APA style paper. And we changed it to where now we removed the parameters of the paper and just did short answers. And grading it that way, it felt so much lighter. And I felt like the students were much more honest in their answers. And it just, I think kind of removing that standard initially in the first week just kind of created, for me, even as as the instructor, it just felt lighter and I was able to provide more feedback as to the content. So I think changing even to short answer helped in that course right away.
Julie, I I think thinking about our expectations as we respond to writing, I think all of us have, in addition maybe to the widely held and in academic circles accepted expectations, probably all of us have also, in addition to that, have expectations for our writing that are particular to us. For example, I know that over the last 20 years, that there has been a shift in the acceptability of, okay, this is a ridiculous, I'm being very transparent here, but our reactions to split infinitives. But I'm telling you, when I was taught to write, that was like a huge deal. And so I still, when I respond to student writings, I just can't help myself. I just have to, like, I have to mark that. I have to point that out. And probably all of us have things like that. One of my colleagues, there, and I know we're not supposed to do this, but there's a range of reactions. I have a colleague who it inflames him when students use anthropomorphisms. I have other colleagues that they don't even see that. And it just, so I think maybe owning what our quirks are and making those apparent to our students in our writing, that's one way of making our expectations transparent.
That's so helpful, Dana. Thanks for your transparency. And it's very true.
Hey, Julie, this is Bill Hunt.
Hi,
I
Bill.
don't see myself on my camera, so I guess you can see me. I think one of the things I struggle with, I teach 714. It's one of the first courses in the EDD program, and the writing abilities are just all over the map. And it's difficult for me to have a solid, consistent expectation for each writer. And I try to let the ones know that are really struggling that, listen, this is a definite art, something that you practice and you become skilled at it. And so when I point out APA mistakes, they feel that, you're kind of picking on them. At first, I don't take off points, but in week 3 or 4, I will. But whenever it's misusing pronouns, I direct them to, the APA manual and read up on using pronouns. So I guess what I'm saying is the expectation for a course is difficult to get for me to get my mind around and be consistent.
I'm glad you shared that. I wonder if anyone else feels similar.
And I don't know what the next expectation is either for the next course. So they leave one
Okay.
course and they're expected to do this. And then is that even going to be expected in the next course?
That's a great point, Bill. Knowing where a course fits in the overall program and what the overall program's expectations of writing are, that would be very helpful, I'm sure, for us as instructors, not just for students. I don't want to cut anyone off. I think I'll move to application 3. So knowing the languages and dialects your students use is good information. The Writing Center is, since doing this study, we've been gathering more information about the students who are using the Writing Center services. And so if you teach a course with a significant writing assignment or portion, you might even consider polling students about their language backgrounds to just discover where they are. And in the Writing Center, another way we've started to apply this is to prioritize who we're hiring. We're hiring bilingual and culturally diverse tutors to help us better get to know our students, better meet their needs. So the question here is to think of specific writing tasks or assignments. Maybe they're already in your courses that might allow for or encourage wider variety of writing styles and language use. For example, is there a reflection paper where this would actually further the purpose of the assignment?
Julie, I do think that we have a lot of students who are translating the assignments back and forth from their native language into English, and then thinking it through in their native language and translating their responses. So difficult for them. It's challenging for instructors because things come out differently. The concept, the way things are framed, it doesn't always translate well, and some of the language does not. And so I try to be really flexible on that. But I was really struck by one student last term when I looked at her reference list, which was extensive. Her references were in Spanish. I mean, one publication after another. So she was obviously doing that translation work. I think sometimes we need to be sensitive to how much work is going into this for them when they have to do that double translation. Mm-hmm. I don't know how they do it. That's just a challenge.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Delilah. I definitely saw similar comments and data coming from some of our participants who speak multiple languages or who for whom English is a second language or third or fourth language, one thing they brought up was how much time it takes. Absolutely. One conversation I've been having with some EDD faculty is about the way discussion posts are assigned, and thinking about, are there discussion posts, or even across the board, maybe particular posts, but discussion posts broadly, where we can encourage students to feel more like they can write naturally or authentically, maybe less formally in those assignments, where there's some room and it might actually help enrich the discussion. The purpose of that discussion would be to build more community or share ideas and just stimulate community discussion. That's maybe one opportunity that has come up.
And I've been trying to give students options, like if they're doing a presentation, they can either use speaker notes or do narration. So maybe that could be a way to kind of make things more approachable.
I think this question in particular is helpful to keep thinking about and then talking about within your program, with the other instructors. I encourage you to take this and talk about it more with your adjunct and professional learning community groups as well, because I think there's a lot that is already being done in many courses or even in your personal practices that we can all learn from and see how they could be applied in your context as well. Well, if there are no other comments on that question, I do want to conclude and offer one last point. I really think this is an important and ongoing discussion. And what I hope you take away from today is that the goal with this discussion is not to get rid of everything we know about academic English and academic writing standards. As Dr. Vey argues, widening the available tools for successful and effective academic writing in a way that doesn't center white speech and writing habits will ultimately serve us as we're working in multilingual institutions like we find ourselves in. So I hope this has been helpful, thought-provoking. You have some things to continue reflecting about. And again, I welcome if you are interested and have more to share or think about and want to have someone to talk to. I'm definitely interested in this conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. And just for the group's information, we'll be sharing these slides. And I think Dr. Glenn wanted to say something just very quickly as we wrap up.
I just wanted to thank you, Julie, for this wonderful presentation. It is very thoughtful, and we should be mindful of everything that we're doing in this and know that this is not just an issue for ACU Dallas, but it permeates higher education across the country. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. And I look forward to even more work in this area to see what we could do in helping our students to be better and helping us to acknowledge their voice. The last thing that I would like to say is, first of all, congratulations to the new faculty council. The results have been given to everyone, and we know that Dr. Feliciano is chair, Dr. Jennifer Butcher is chair, co-chair, assistant chair, vice chair. Have to get the names right. And then we have Dr. Tiffany Dahlman, who is a secretary, and then the other board positions. I'm so excited and so thankful and grateful that you guys have made these choices. I think you have a wonderful team to work with, and we look forward to a lot of work coming from the council. I would like to probably meet with the executive leaders of the council to talk about a few things before you guys get started. So I'll be in touch with you about that, but I am just excited, and I would like everyone to just wish you guys the best and congratulations. And if there's anything that you need from us, please reach out and let us know. We thank you again for everything today. Thank you for the FDI team and your hard work and diligence in this. And we just look forward to more from you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Dr. Swain. Have a great day. Thank you.